The air in Rome hung thick that year, like the moment before a thunderstorm. The Republic was a rotting beast, wheezing its last breaths, and in its shadow stood a man who dared to believe he could rebuild it in his own image. Julius Caesar. The name alone sent shivers through the Senate halls. This was no longer just a general, a conqueror, a politician. This was something new, something dangerous. He had crossed the Rubicon not just with an army, but with an idea that Rome could belong to one. And the mobs loved him for it. The streets chanted his name like a prayer. The Senate? They whispered it like a curse. Because Caesar didn't just want power, he wanted to be power, to sit above laws, above tradition, above even the gods themselves. And that is how you make enemies, real ones, the kind who don't just want you defeated, they want you erased. So when the Ides of March came, and the sky darkened over Rome, the knives weren't just waiting in the Senate, they were hidden in the hands of men who had once called him friend. And Caesar, he walked right toward them, because that's what kings do. Rome never made it easy for him. No, Caesar had to claw his way up from nothing, a man stripped of his inheritance, his priesthood, his dignity. They thought exile would break him. They were wrong. Exile was where he learned the first rule of power. When you have nothing left to lose, that's when you're most dangerous. He came back, not with an army at first, but with words. Courtrooms became his battleground, and every case was a performance, a chance to make Rome remember his name. Then came the pirates, captured at sea, held for ransom. He laughed in their faces, promised them he'd return and crucify every last one. They thought it was a joke. It wasn't. When he was freed, he hunted them down, just as he'd sworn. A lesson written in blood. Julius Caesar kept his promises, but words and vengeance weren't enough. Power in Rome demanded more. So he went to Gaul, and there, in the mud and slaughter of a 9-year war, he forged something far more valuable than victory. He forged an army that would die for him, not for the Senate, not for the Republic, for him. And when the Senate, trembling at his growing might, ordered him to disband his legions and return to Rome as a private citizen, he stood at the Rubicon and made his choice. The dice weren't just thrown, they were shattered. 500 men crossed that river with him. By the time he reached Rome, the city fell without a fight. Pompey fled. The Senate collapsed. And the people? They cheered. Because Caesar understood something his enemies never did. Rome didn't need a republic. It needed a king. And he was ready to be crowned. You want to understand power? Really understand it? Then watch this man. Young Caesar should have unalive, broke, and forgotten. Exiled. Hunted. No family name left worth spitting on. But he had 2 weapons nobody saw coming. A smile that disarmed enemies, and a mind that calculated years ahead. The pirates learned this first. They kidnapped him, laughed when he joked about crucifying them. Then he did it. Gaul was where he became something else. Not just a general, a force of nature. While senators bickered, he conquered millions. The money flowed. The army worshipped him. And Rome, she watched, equal parts aroused and terrified. Then came the Rubicon, that shallow river every general feared to cross. Caesar paused just a moment, then stepped. 1 legion against all Rome, the gamble of the century, and nobody stopped him. That's the terrifying part. The Senate collapsed like rotten wood. Pompey ran. The people cheered, because Caesar gave them what all mobs secretly crave, a strong hand to obey so they don't have to think. But absolute power, it's addictive. The statues got taller, the titles grander. Dictator for life wasn't enough. He needed to be divine. And that's when his friends started counting the knives. The Ides of March wasn't an assassination, it was an intervention. Brutus, Cassius, even his protege, they weren't unaliving a tyrant. They were putting down a rabid wolf Rome herself had created. Here's the kicker. It didn't work. Because you can unalive a man, but you can't end what he represents. Caesar became Kaiser, became Tsar. His murderers? Erased from history. The assassins thought they were saving Rome. They stood in the Senate, bloody knives raised, shouting about liberty and the Republic. Brutus even made a speech to the crowd. But here's what nobody tells you. The people didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They ran, not from fear of tyranny, but from the terrifying realization that their king was unalived. Within hours, Rome became a city of ghosts. Caesar's body lay abandoned in the Senate, but his presence was everywhere. In the markets where he'd lowered bread prices, in the slums where he'd given land to veterans, in the colonies where he'd granted citizenship. The mob didn't want the Republic back. They wanted him back. And when Mark Antony held up that torn, blood-stained toga at the funeral, showing where each knife had entered, Rome went mad. The assassins had to flee, like common criminals. The aftermath was worse than anyone imagined. What came next wasn't freedom. It was the exact opposite. First, the triumvirate. Antony, Octavian, Lepidus. 3 men dividing Rome like thieves splitting loot. Then the proscriptions. Death lists that made Sulla's purges look tame. Senators who supported the assassins? Hunted down. Their property stolen. Their families destroyed. Brutus and Cassius, unalived by their own swords at Philippi. And Octavian, the boy Caesar had named in his will. He learned the real lesson, not to avoid Caesar's mistakes, but to perfect them. The final joke. Here's the brutal irony. The Republic didn't end when Caesar crossed the Rubicon. It didn't end when he became dictator. It ended because they unalived him. With one act, the assassins proved what Caesar had always known. Rome would rather have one strong hand than a Senate full of squabbling nobles. And so, Octavian became Augustus. The Republic became an empire. And Caesar became not just a name, but what all men who rule must either become or destroy.